Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 election. In a sense, the 2019 election was triggered for similar reasons to the 2017 election. Boris Johnson, just like Theresa May before him, was facing a parliament that was divided on the issue of Brexit. But they were united in their desire to frustrate Johnson's wish to bulldoze Parliament into accepting his deal by forcing them to choose between voting for his deal or crashing out of the EU without a deal. Parliament responded to this by twice taking control of the House of Commons to pass bills to extend the Brexit deadline. And when Johnson tried to get around this parliamentary hurdle by proroguing Parliament, preventing them from sitting, the Supreme Court intervened, declaring Johnson's actions to be unlawful. He therefore decided, as May had in 2017, that he had no option but to call an election. But even this desire was frustrated 3 times, as Johnson's didn't have the 2/3 majority needed to call an early election under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So the government called an election by passing a bill with a simple majority, the Early Parliamentary General Election Bill, which set the date of the election as the 12th of December 2019, the first December election in the UK since 1923. The 2019 election is interesting because Boris Johnson, as the leader of the Conservative Party, manages to achieve something that eluded his 2 immediate predecessors, Theresa May and David Cameron, winning a sizable majority in the House of Commons. In fact, it was the biggest majority the party had won since 1987 and the biggest share of the vote the party had achieved since Margaret Thatcher came to power in 1979. Conversely, for Labour, despite doing better than 2010 and 2015 in terms of their share of the vote, they won fewer seats than in any election since 1935, performing even worse on this metric than Michael Foot's Labour Party in 1983. Indeed, the scale of Johnson's victory was mostly about the Labour vote collapsing relative to their strong performance in 2017. The Conservative vote in 2019 only increased by 1.3 percentage points, whereas the Labour vote fell by 7.9 percentage points, 2.6 million fewer votes than in 2017. Part of the story was the fall of the so-called Red Wall seats to the Conservative Party. These were seats in the Midlands and Northern England, for example Blythe Valley, Bishop Auckland and Workington, that had been Labour strongholds for decades, which switched to the Conservatives in 2019. Many of these seats had been moving away from Labour for a while, and some of the Red Wall actually fell in 2017, but the sudden collapse of so many former Labour strongholds was the dominant story of election night. The 2017 to 2019 Parliament was one of the most dramatic and chaotic periods of Westminster politics in living memory, all set in motion by Theresa May's failure to secure a majority at the 2019 snap election. This left her hanging on to power by securing a supply and confidence agreement with the DUP, who agreed to keep her in office by voting through Conservative budgets and voting against motions of no confidence. But the fundamental problem that caused May to call the election in the first place was exacerbated by the terrible outcome in 2017. May was faced with trying to secure a majority for her withdrawal agreement and political declaration to take Britain out of the EU in circumstances where it became clear that there wasn't a parliamentary majority for any of the possible ways forward. This led May to face 3 big defeats as she tried to get her deal through Parliament, including the biggest defeat in the history of the House of Commons and the 4th biggest defeat. She also faced a vote of no confidence within her own party and then in the House of Commons, which she survived. But she was eventually forced to resign just after the Conservative Party ended up coming 5th in the 2019 European parliamentary elections. During this turbulent period, both Labour and the Conservatives saw their poll ratings decline, and new parties emerged to fill the void. The Independent Group for Change was formed when 8 Labour MPs and 3 Conservative MPs left their parties to form a new pro-Remain grouping in the House of Commons, and the Brexit Party was formed by Nigel Farage. This led to a turbulent period of polling, where at different points Labour, the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats and the Brexit Party could point to polls putting them in pole position. Anyway, the resignation of Theresa May led to a leadership election, which Boris Johnson easily won. Johnson's election as Tory leader helped the Conservative Party to recover their polling position as the party attracted support from voters who might otherwise have been attracted to the Brexit Party or UKIP. But Johnson was to face similar problems in Parliament to May, and soon realised that the only way to resolve the impasse in Parliament was to call an election to get Brexit done. During the election campaign, the Conservative Party focused on a simple core message, with Johnson arguing that his deal was oven-ready and that he needed to be given a mandate to level up the country and get Brexit done. This easy-to-understand core message and the brevity of the manifesto meant that the Conservative message was easy to communicate to the public. The party also benefited from the fact that the Brexit Party stood aside in all 317 seats the Conservatives won at the last election. Johnson himself can also be seen as an electoral asset, as his unique leadership style allowed him to cut through in a way that few politicians can. The Conservative Party's election advertising reflected Johnson's style of leadership, with one campaign video doing a spoof of Love Actually, and a second featuring Johnson walking around Conservative Party headquarters answering random questions as he makes a cup of tea. Let's watch that video before we discuss the Labour campaign.
Hey Boris, you alright?
I'm good, how are you?
What's been on your mind today?
Well, I can't hide it from you. I've been thinking a bit about this general election campaign.
And how do you typically start your day?
I tend to get up pretty early and then I go down and take the dog for a walk, and dog does his business and so on and so forth. That's my start to the day.
And what's the most surprising thing you found about being PM?
I was pretty incredulous the other day when I found out I couldn't actually get a Thai curry to deliver to number 10 because of the security problems. The security there was too tight.
And on that subject, fish and chips or a Sunday roast?
I think fish and chips on a cold night on a beach, you can't beat it.
Why are we having this election?
We're having this election because basically the whole political system is paralysed, and we have a fantastic Brexit deal that we did. Nobody said we could do it, but we did. And then Parliament refused to knock it through, so that we're stuck in the EU when the people voted to leave. So we need to have an election.
This one divides opinion, but Marmite, yes or no?
Marmite, yes.
What do you think are the biggest challenges facing our country?
Look, this is an amazing country. It's going gangbusters in so many ways. We lead the world in so many technologies, but our political system is blocked at the moment, and that's the thing that we need to address. We need to get a new government, a new majority government, and I hope a Conservative government, and move this thing on.
Now, I know you're a very busy man, but when was the last time you cooked, and what did you make?
How are you? Nice to see you. The last time I cooked was last night, and I made steak and oven chips, which were very good.
What's your favourite band?
Look, this is either the Clash or it's the Rolling Stones, and mainly I listen to the Rolling Stones nowadays. So you can make of that what you will.
What would you say to someone who's wondering who to vote for at this election?
I would say it is a very, very simple choice. You can either go with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party and be in no doubt that if you vote for any other of the minor parties, you will end up with a coalition of chaos with Jeremy Corbyn at the lead, at the head. And that will not only be an economic catastrophe for this country, it will also be a political disaster, because their programme, would you believe it, is for another Brexit referendum, next year, spend the whole of the next year in a referendum on Brexit, a referendum on Scotland, to say nothing of the economic catastrophe involved in a Corbyn-led socialist, semi-Marxist Labour government. Or you can go with us, get Brexit done with our deal, which is ready to go, oven ready, slam it in the microwave, it's there. Get it done in days, and take the country forward. We're investing massively in the NHS, the biggest investment for a generation, massively in schools, in policing, 20,000 police we're putting out on the streets of this country. We're going to be doing a huge infrastructure revolution for the whole of the UK, gigabit broadband across the whole of the UK. And we can pay for all that because we're the party that understands the importance of a dynamic market economy. So that's my message. Vote for us. Vote for a compassionate, one-nation, conservative government that understands the symmetry between a free market economy and great public services. Let's get Brexit done and unleash the potential of this whole country. See you later.
Labour began the election campaign polling less than 30% and trailing the Conservative Party by 10 points, a gap they didn't manage to narrow during the campaign. Their manifesto was even more radical than in 2017. In it they promised to nationalise the big six energy companies, the National Grid, Water, Royal Mail and BT Broadband, scrap universal credit, introduce a national care service, give free bus travel to the under-25s, build 100,000 council houses a year, reach net zero by 2030, and increase the minimum wage to £10 an hour for all workers. They also made an uncosted £58 billion commitment during the campaign to compensate WASPy women who had lost out on state pensions when the state pension age was equalised for men and women. Individual policies in the manifesto were popular when polled, but it was probably the case that, taken together, the electorate did not think the manifesto was deliverable over the course of a single parliament, and the additional commitment to WASPy women, whilst laudable, blew out of the water the effort that John Macdonald, Shadow Chancellor, had made to fully cost the manifesto by explaining where the money would come from. The messaging was also less clear than it had been, with the slogan "It's time for real change" replacing "For the many, not the few" on the front of their manifesto. This made it harder to communicate Labour's core message to voters. The centrality of the Brexit question was also a feature that marks the 2019 election, compared to 2017. In the previous election, Labour had been able to neutralise the question of Brexit by committing to leave the EU, but their policy in 2019 was democratically determined by the pro-Remain party membership, and so Labour were committed to renegotiate the deal and put it to a second referendum. This policy was bound to alienate Leave voters, whilst muddying the waters with Remain voters who might feel more attracted by the Liberal Democrat policy, which was to scrap Brexit altogether. Labour also faced accusations that the party was institutionally anti-Semitic, including a statement made during the campaign by the Chief Rabbi of England and Wales. These accusations had already led to an investigation by the EHRC, which was to report back after the election, finding the party guilty of serious failings in the way they dealt with cases of anti-Semitism within the party. Corbyn's leadership was also an issue for Labour, as evidenced by polling released after the election, which showed that voters who had moved from Labour in 2019 cited Jeremy Corbyn's leadership as a reason. The unpopularity of Corbyn was partly a product of an incredibly hostile media ecosystem, dominated by the right-wing print media, which is always a structural problem faced by any Labour leader, but which seemed to go into overdrive, with studies showing that the print media was disproportionately positive towards the Conservative Party and Johnson, and negative towards the Labour Party and Corbyn during this election campaign. Labour's party political broadcast focused on the threat a Tory government would pose to the NHS, with Corbyn releasing a 451-page dossier that claimed that the NHS was up for sale. Ultimately, however, Labour's attempt to shift the conversation away from Brexit and towards their policy agenda failed. Let's watch Labour's party election broadcast to get a sense of their campaign.
My dad was a GP, and so I've always grown up with a strong idea of the health service, the NHS, and kind of what it means to people.
This is me as a young 19-year-old girl when I came to England. England was recruiting for nurses, and it's after I came here then that I realised what this beautiful NHS was.
So I remember learning about the NHS at school, and I just remember being so amazed at how much resistance there was, and yet they still managed to create this incredible service.
I mean, one thing I tell American people who are like, "You really like the NHS?" And I'm like, I'm crazy about it.
As a country, it's something that we should be really, really proud of and not take it for granted either. More of us are coming to the realisation that the crisis the NHS is in is due to a deliberate ideology that wants to make it easier for a private-based system to come in.
If we leave the EU, under the terms of Boris Johnson's disastrous Brexit deal, then the NHS is going to be on the table. Donald Trump is going to divvy it up to private pharmaceutical companies, and the NHS as we know it will be gone.
In the last 10 years, nursing's got harder. We do more unpaid work. I see A&Es getting busier.
Short staff, people are getting burnout.
I've been a GP for 30 years. It breaks my heart we can't give enough appointments to our patients.
4.4 million people are now waiting for elective surgery, and that's people in pain and in fear and in discomfort. And cancer rates are the worst ever, with people waiting for treatment, waiting for diagnosis, and that is just unacceptable.
What makes it worse is seeing politicians on TV pretending things aren't getting worse, pretending A&Es aren't overflowing, pretending things aren't getting privatised.
You don't want what I grew up with. 17 years ago, I was in a car accident and I got badly hurt and I had to have some surgeries. My insurance company, when I started to generate big bills, it just dropped me and I became responsible for tens of thousands of dollars in bills. And that was terrifying. Then I came over here about 5 years ago with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and my wife was pregnant with our son Henry. And a little before Henry's first birthday, he got sick. And we found out that it was a brain tumor. And a very bad one. And the NHS took extraordinary care of him. We didn't get the outcome that we wanted. His cancer progressed and he died. But throughout the 21 months that he was under the care of the NHS, the care that he received and that our family received was truly unbelievable.
It's important to remember, amongst all the talk of crisis and challenges, what a brilliant thing the NHS does every single day. The NHS looks after people from the first to the last day of their lives. It helps people when they're at their most vulnerable, when they're suffering, and it does so regardless of your ability to pay for it.
As far as I can tell, the NHS is basically the pinnacle of human achievement. That's a massive reason I support Labour. And I support Labour enthusiastically and proudly. I mean, the real choice in this election, the two sides, are the billionaires, the millionaires who work for billionaires, that's one side, and the other side is the rest of us, the people who use the NHS and depend on it. The disabled kid whose parents aren't wealthy and depends on social care, okay? That's who this election is about.
We need a party that truly believes in our NHS, will invest in our NHS, and that party is Labour.
To save the NHS, make sure you vote Labour.
That's why I think we've got to get rid of the Tories.
I'm voting Labour to save our NHS.
Vote for Labour. Save our NHS.
Please vote Labour on December the 12th.
The only way to end this crisis in the NHS is to vote Labour on the 12th of December.
Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats targeted Remain voters by promising to stop Brexit entirely. This strategy benefited from being clear, but risked alienating some voters who might reasonably think that ignoring the outcome of a referendum is fundamentally undemocratic. The Lib Dem leader also made the mistake of overhyping her party's prospects by describing herself as a candidate for Prime Minister when speaking at the Liberal Democrat Party conference. In the end, however, the party only lost one seat, that of the party leader herself, who was therefore forced to resign at the day after the election. The outcome of the election was an 80-seat Conservative majority, with Labour losing 60 seats and the Conservatives gaining 48 seats. The SNP also had a good night, winning 48 out of 54 Scottish constituencies. Just like in 2017, the most important predictor of voting behaviour in 2019 was age, with 56% of 18 to 24-year-olds voting Labour, compared to just 14% of those aged 70 or over. In fact, had only 18 to 24-year-olds voted in 2019, Labour would have won a majority of 438, reducing the Conservative Party to just 4 seats. So why did the 2019 election go the way that it did? Well, people will disagree about this, But I think the most important reason for the result was that the issue of Brexit loomed large during this campaign, which meant that the simplicity of the Conservative message to get Brexit done was easy to communicate to voters. This focus made it difficult for Labour to talk about the broader issues they wanted to campaign on. Evidence from YouGov shows that Labour only took 49% of the Remain vote, whereas the Conservative Party took 74% of the Leave vote. And whereas the Conservatives held on to 85% of the vote they won in 2017, Labour lost 11% of their 2017 voters to the Conservatives and 9% to the Liberal Democrats. Ultimately, winning an election under first past the post is about bringing a fragile electoral coalition together, which the Conservatives managed to do and Labour failed to do at this election. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Please do comment to let me know what I should make a video about next, and please do like and subscribe to the channel.